Andrew, have you heard anything from Josh? Will he be joining us?
I haven't heard either way, Scott.
Okay.
I'm just aware of Don and Bruce.
Okay. I'll give him another minute or two. Well, seeing that it's 7 and we do have a quorum here tonight, let's get going. And if Josh joins us, that'd be great. Call to order the December 15th meeting of the Planning Board. Chairman Don Span is unable to be with us here tonight, so I'll be chairing the meeting. Patty, if you could do roll.
Patty is actually, I'll do roll, Scott. Patty is on the meeting, but she's off tonight since it's just a workshop. So Scott
Okay.
Libby.
I am here.
Dan Flagg, and we'll welcome our new member, Dan Flagg, everybody, just so you know. If you did
Present.
not have yet to have a meeting with our new member. So this is Dan's introduction to the board.
Present.
And I think I heard you say present. Yep. Thanks,
Yes.
Dan. Ron Bisson
Present.
and Larry Brand.
Present.
And Bruce Van Note also chimed in tonight as well, that he is going to try to make it maybe late and may not make it at all.
All right. Well, it wasn't on the agenda, but I was going to welcome Dan to the board also. So now we have a full assortment of 7 of us again, full complement of the board members. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
We have our, I think, one meeting scheduled thing to vote on, and that would be the November 3rd minutes. I don't know if anyone has any comments on those. Larry, Ron?
I don't have any comments, Scott, but do we lack a quorum for approving the minutes? Because Dan was not a member of November 3rd.
Right. I think we're all set to approve the minutes as is.
You
With the three
have
of
a
us.
quorum, which means you can take a vote. It doesn't mean that all members need to vote, Larry.
Okay, just checking. Then I move we adopt the November 3rd minutes as written and submitted.
We have a second, Ron?
Oh.
I'll second it.
All
Yeah, I
right.
second it.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. So we have 3 in favor and an abstention from Dan. Since we're going to be moving to workshop, I'll take a motion on adjourning the meeting. And
Motion
moving
to
workshop.
adjourn. Motion to adjourn. To go to workshop.
I'll second it.
All right, motion's been made and seconded, and all in favor of adjourning the meeting and moving to workshop, say aye.
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 Opposed? So unanimous. The meeting is now closed and we will move to workshop. And the item first on the agenda, I think, is for Susan to provide and maybe Rick also, the CPIC chair and vice chair to provide a introduction and kind of a game plan of where they're going and how we can work together to get there.
Right. Thank you very much for having us on your agenda as a workshop item. We look forward to being part of your process going forward. If it's all right, what I'd like to do is just kind of step back in time a little bit and bring folks along to where we are now. when the 2019 plan was approved at the town meeting, that was May 2019, lots happened since then. COVID-19 is big on our lives right now, and we're on Zoom, but we have a new town manager, we have a new assistant town manager, we have a new police chief, and there may be other new people, but those are the ones I've sort of taken stock of. So after that plan was approved, there was a bit of a waiting period. In January of this year, at a meeting of the select board, 3 members of the update committee were appointed as the transition team to move forward with the implementation committee. And that was myself, Larry Fitch, and Joe Feely. And we met several times to try to sort of get our arms around exactly how we might take those steps forward. We also did, you may recall that the way the 2019 plan was done involved a lot of outreach to the community. And we had a number of public meetings and a lot of input online. So there are a lot of people who showed strong interest in how that plan turned out. And so we reached out to some folks and we brought on, there were 4 people that we had, more people that we had conversations with, but 4 people who submitted applications. And those folks include Rick Schultz, who is our vice chair. And we have, where is my little list? We have John Doerr, we have Angela Twitchell, and Raya Somea. So you probably know all of these folks in their various capacities. Did I miss anyone? I don't think so. I think that's it. So what we have, when we first met in August, that appointment process happened in August of 2020. And in that month, we had our first meeting. We are a mixture of working and retired folks. So when we meet, which is once a month, we meet on the second Monday of each month from 4 to 5:30. Our meetings, of course, are open to the public. And because they're on Zoom, it's become quite easy for people to attend. We've been really pleased to have people attend from the very beginning. Not in huge numbers, of course, but there are people who are showing interest, and we appreciate that. So we've now had 5 meetings, and what we've really done, is at each agenda, we've had enough agendas formed that we've had the opportunity to address different elements of the plan and enable the people who are new to the plan. It's one thing to read it and digest it, but it's another thing to come together as a committee and get to know each other and begin to think about how to move forward with this. And we're doing that together. That's a process that we're all engaged in terms of educating ourselves about how the changes, how the different steps will take place. So we, and one of the things that we're learning is how each of us come to this work, and the skills and experience we've had, where our interests lie, and in sort of the learning process will definitely continue as we move forward. We have a work plan, and we've begun to delve into the section of the plan. I don't know how much of the structure of the plan you recall, but toward the last section of the plan is on implementation. And there's a strategy matrix there. And what we have done is sort of delve into that to see how those various 9 big ideas apportion themselves in terms of the strategy steps, the goals and tactics, how those break out among the various town departments and committees and commissions. So how to really move forward with those. So that's what we've been doing, is getting our arms around that and the various tasks. We have met with Derek and Mark, and tonight, and on the 3rd of December, we presented to the select board, shared with them our work plan, entertained questions. They seem very engaged and appreciative of what we're doing. And it seemed to us, to all of us, that meeting with you at this early point makes sense. As you know, you folks are going to be one of the main partners in our moving forward with this. One of the things that was stressed in that section on implementation is that, this is kind of a daunting task. And I think some of us actually got involved, and only sort of the degree of dauntingness has dawned on us as we've been moving forward with this. But we're all very enthusiastic, and so we're learning, and we thought it would make sense for us to sort of share some of our basic steps with you, let you meet the chair and vice chair, and as your section of the plan, if you will. Of the 9 big ideas, the planning board is a key partner in 8 of the 9. And on the lead responsibilities on those, of course, as your work has always been, it's the planning department that is the lead player. But in some of those elements, it will be the Topsham Conservation Commission, and with some it might be the rec department. So, you will be meeting various members of the committee over time. We look forward, all of us, to working with you. And I think I'll probably leave it there. Rick, if there's anything that you feel should be.
Yeah, I think the only other thing to add is basically the implementation committee here. Our role or our function is really to be champions and promoters of the comp plan, and basically a committee that's maintaining the momentum of the comp planning through the implementation phase, and monitoring, keeping a pulse, and really checking in with the various departments. The planning board is probably going to be, a heavier connection than a lot of other departments, but it's really, our role as a committee is really just to, promote, champion, and keep a focus on the goals that are in the comp plan, and in whatever way possible, facilitate advancing those, so they don't just kind of fall on the wayside and not get addressed again until the next time it comes around to updating the comp plan.
Right.
And so that's really, our role here is to kind of, just interact with you, and primarily with Rod, and our work with Rod is more in the zoning and policy areas to promote the comp plan. That's really our role.
And I think that we're very mindful that this is a long-term process. That in the strategy matrix, all of the various big ideas and the action steps kind of all have, a lead and support player. And then there's a short term, medium term, and long term. And you can't get your mind around all of it. You just can't. And so we're trying to, I think, be as expansive as we can, and at the same time have this be a manageable process for the 7 of us. I take heart that there are 7 of you, and so 7 seems to be a very good number for collegial, effective, heavy lifting. And I think as we move forward, with various aspects of the plan, we will be able to sort of embrace more and more pieces of it. But, as we started out, it's sort of like, your vision is fairly narrow. And as we move forward, we will understand more and more how those pieces work. And reminding ourselves that this is, it's beyond a 5-year process, but we're kind of thinking in terms of 2 to 5 years at the moment, So if you have any, for most of us on the implementation committee, this is our first round doing this. Maybe some of you on the planning board have had such terms of service that this is a second go for you. If you have any suggestions or advice for us, we would be glad to hear that. And please feel free to contact us with questions as they come up.
Well, great. Well, thank you for the introductions and introduction of where you guys are going with this. I don't know, Ron, I think you've had a few comp plans that you've been involved with while you've been on the planning board, haven't you? I don't know if folks have some feedback they want to provide at this point. That would be great. Did you have anything, Ron, or?
Yeah, I have been on a few.
And Larry, did you have any questions or input you wanted to provide at this point?
Not at the present time, Scott. Thank you.
How about you, Dan?
Sure. Yeah, I did attend. I think it was your first meeting, Susan. It certainly sounds like you have a good group there to work with. I would be interested. I didn't get a chance to look at the work plan that you presented to the select board. And I was wondering if I'm kind of looking ahead to 2021, obviously. And, have you folks kind of focused on, obviously it's a major task and it's a kind of a big a la carte of things to focus on, but do you have kind of a focus area for goals for 2021?
Well, I think the 2 general areas that we're wanting to move forward with, sort of inching forward simultaneously, would be in terms of land use zoning. And the other is, you probably knew from the plan that of all the folks who came out and participated in the plan, the number one issue that people were concerned about was safe streets. And for the town to begin balancing a little bit the focus on, pedestrian and cycling traffic rather than just vehicular traffic, and kind of looking at how we go about that. So that's the other one, looking at developing a complete streets policy would be the other area.
Hey.
One thing that I'll add, if I may jump
Sure,
in, Susan.
Please.
So as this comp plan committee, and I've been involved with one previously, and some of you folks on planning board have as well. This one is definitely looking at the full spectrum of what their role is as a CPIC, and not just focused on the zoning implementation. The zoning implementation will take up quite a chunk of their time. So they're currently, and Daniel C. will email out that work plan for it, and we'll post it online too, because it It's already been presented, should be up already. But the zoning, that is what Susan alluded to earlier as partnering with the planning board. And in the past, what Topsham has done, we've kind of gone through a planning and zoning process all over again, if you will, but it's really a zoning implementation process where when that gets crafted, it comes back to the planning board to go through the process of, going through getting on to town meeting. I think this time around, the planning board will be updated quite a bit more than what has happened in the past. So that was kind of to be a bit more specific about the zoning implementation. And the focus over the short term with zoning is, and this speaks to what Susan just said about the walkability, if you will, the downtown core zoning, the growth area, and updating that. And they'll be back in front of you again. They're going to be going to the select board to discuss that and move forward with that. But that will be something that will come back in more detail a little bit later.
Okay, so that gets to my question as far as you had mentioned land use zoning. I was going to ask where. So it's the growth area downtown primarily.
That's right.
And to try and connect your two big points, both that and the safe streets.
Right.
Yeah. And if you read the comp plan, there is a focus downtown, and the zoning doesn't align with the vision that was created from this past comp plan. The suburban / rural lands, really, there's very minor tweaking to be done with that. And it doesn't need as much immediate work, I will say, as the downtown area. So that's the focus for the next couple of years.
Well, good. I certainly wish you luck over the coming years. I'm glad you're talking, 2 to 5 years. I know this is the second one. I have been on the planning board, not quite as long as Ron, but I know we got a lot done after the last comp plan. Out of the gate, we did a bunch of studies, the 196 corridor study, addressed things out in the industrial zone. A number of those things that were on their checklist from that comp plan. And look forward to working with you guys on addressing some of these. And I don't know if you've listened to many of our meetings lately. We've had a few discussions on potential changes in zoning that folks have brought up. And the comp plan has come up a number of times, both in those discussions of changes to zoning and also in looking at specific projects that have come before us that aren't necessarily hypothetical. They've come out and they've been conditional uses, and we've had to go back to understanding are they in concert and meeting the goals of the comp plan. And the one thing that keeps coming back to me is the more that CPIC and those of us working with you can get addressed specifically in the ordinance, the less interpretation is left up to developers and the planning board. And that's really, from my purview, how we're going to be able to implement the will of all the folks that have participated in this process. Because, when it comes down to getting to the nitty gritty, it's difficult at times to, people can pull things out of the comp plan to support their arguments in multiple ways. But if they're enshrined in the ordinance, then it makes it a much better black and white type issue for us.
Right.
On our end, making our job easier. So the more we can help you to get your job done, I think the better it'll be for us down the line, and to see what to the implementation of this vision to help the town, because there's a lot of great stuff in there.
Thanks. That's very clear.
I think a lot of that comes into the kind of the goals matrix and, aligning that and advancing the thing where you guys are facing obstacles advancing those goals.
Great. Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll see you again probably soon, early
Sounds
in
good.
2021.
All right. Yeah, maybe at some point in person and not on the screen, but this has
Maybe.
worked well for us for a while now. Well, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And the next topic on the workshop, Andrew, are we doing the waiver one or the lasting permit review or?
We can do the blasting permit first,
Okay.
if that's okay with you guys. And I think this is relatively straightforward. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, there a couple of times a year we will get applications for a blasting action that triggers your review. So right now, blasting applications that are moving less than 300 yards of material can be reviewed and approved by the code enforcement officer. And anything over 300 yards needs to come to you all. We're looking to expand or extend or raise that threshold so that more can just be handled by Tom Lister, our codes enforcement officer, and less has to come to the planning board. That's really the gist of it, is to make it a little bit more of a streamlined process. So first off, thanks to Dan for noting that I did not send on the ordinance text in my packet on Friday. That went out this morning. Since it did come out too late, I'll just share my screen and kind of walk you very quickly through the proposed language. Again, I think this is pretty straightforward, and then I'll take your questions. Hang on one moment. The blasting permit process is in its own separate chapter, chapter 85. The first set of revisions are just a simple changing of that threshold number. So going from 300 yards to 1,000 yards. Tom Lister also helped identify a couple of other small corrections to the ordinance, including just kind of clarifying exactly what our review process is now. So we're kind of moving this from being a kind of a site plan type of review to more of that of a building permit. So instead of coordinating the review of a whole bunch of people, really it's just the codes officer who does the review on this. So we struck the town planner's review and approval prior to handing it to Tom. Tom does the review now. Tom can issue the permit for 300 or less right now. We're expecting that he'd be able to do that for up to 1,000 as well. Some additional language, changing musts to will and reviewed to issue, just to have consistent language and to kind of use some terminology that's a little bit better defined in the legal field too, must versus will. This next section, which is under the performance standards, at first glance in this text looks like I'm just striking an entire section. That's not the case. There was an amendment to this blasting permit process in 1997 that intended to eliminate a paragraph. And when they wrote it, it didn't actually eliminate the paragraph. So if you go to our code today, and I'll pull that up. Letter E and letter F are exceptionally similar language. And in fact, there's an editor's note that indicates that when it was amended, they didn't actually strike it, they just relettered it. So there are now two exceptionally similar requirements there. At Tom's direction, we're proposing to strike the latter one, or the first one rather, E. Again, 300 yards change to 1,000 yards. After the issuance of a blasting permit, blasters need to notify the code enforcement office when they're getting ready to strike off a blast. In general practice, that is usually an email a day beforehand. Tom really felt like this was an onerous requirement that was unnecessary to demand. So we stroked this very specific component of what needs to be relayed. They just need to say that they're going to be following their plan. And again, clarifications as to what the threshold is and who is actually making the determination about notification requirements. So that's the basics of this proposal. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. That threshold number of 1,000 was kind of briefly discussed at a previous meeting. I'm happy to revise that based on your all's input. I hope after all that I didn't find out that I was on mute. That would have been a bummer.
We would have told you more quickly. Yeah, my only question, I had a question on that that paragraph B under 85.6 or -6 that got stricken. It just seemed like the first part of that, the and shall, was just providing information when they call. I didn't know why that part. I can understand the additional notification not being needed, but it seemed like when they call 24 hours in advance, they should give a general time and location that they do, or where the blast needs to be done and the amount of explosives. But I mean, if that's all in the plan anyway, I guess that's probably why Tom's striking it.
Yeah, I can certainly ask Tom what he was thinking there. Frankly, I don't really recall his exact reason for striking that portion. So.
Yeah, when I first read it, I was like, oh, okay, so you got to call again 2 hours before you do it, but then rereading it's not really 2 hours before. It's just that you're going to give the general time that you're going to be doing the blasting when you call. So that was the only question I had. Did anyone else have any questions on the blasting?
No. I think it looks good.
Dan or Larry, anything? No?
I do. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I've got a bunch. One, I think 1,000 cubic yards is a heck of a jump from 300. I mean, unless I misunderstand what a cubic yard is, a cubic yard is a yard by a yard by a yard. And we're talking for 1,000, that'd be 10 yards wide by 100 yards long, if it's only a yard deep, let's say. I mean, so I really have a problem with jumping that all the way up to 1,000 because I think that's a lot of material. The other thing, actually, in that first paragraph, it's written applications for blasting and removal of more than whatever cubic yards of material total per project will be issued by the planning board. Well, it says an application for a permit at the beginning of that paragraph. So that reads that we're issuing the application, not the permit, the way that's written right now. The other area that I have is under that 85.6 notices B, notifying the code enforcement officer such a blast is planned. Such notification shall be received at least 24 hours prior to the planned detonation. I could, if I'm doing a blast, I could satisfy that by notifying the code enforcement officer 3 weeks before the planned detonation. It doesn't tell when the detonation is going to be.
Mm-hmm. I read that.
And I think other than that, those are my 2 or 3 major concerns.
Reflecting on the conversation that I had with Tom, I think Tom's perspective on that language was that it does him no good to understand the details of the blast because he doesn't have any capacity to notify those who might be affected. So, this is assumedly a acute notification that, a blaster's getting ready to press the button at some point in time in the coming hours. And the sense that I get from reading is to alert the town that the button's going to be pushed, and that, I guess, I don't know.
Well, I think if you say at least 24 hours and no
Provide
more
the time and day.
48 or something,
Yeah,
It was in the past a record keeping item for the planning office to keep records of whenever we got calls from blasting. So that, 2 weeks later, somebody calls the office about a blast, we'd have recorded that, yeah, they called and they said they were going to do it at 3 p.m. on Tuesday, whatever. It's pretty much a courtesy call from the blasting company to alert us if we take any calls from neighbors wondering what's going on. We actually have an answer of what's going on. And that happens, I mean, the major difference with all of this is really the review board, whether it's the code officer or the planning board, the information is the same. Larry, to kind of answer your cubic yard question, the planning board will have review over any commercial disturbance over 5,000 square feet of soil anyway, which would be triggered. I mean, to have them have a blasting permit in front of you at that point would make sense as well. So, I think the intent of, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, we just saw 2 home permits that were just over 300 cubic yards go to the planning board. It's a home. They don't need to come to you guys to build a house, but they had to come to get the blasting. So we're trying to find a balance of what's appropriate. The code officer is a good code officer. The rules are very good for the most part. What makes sense for issuance of permits, what board, what time frame, all of that kind of thing, and notification.
And were those just over 300? I thought one of them was closer to 600 or 700.
True.
I mean,
yeah, one was actually fairly large. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, Larry, I know we're trying to visualize how much material this is. I tend to convert it to dump trucks, figuring maybe a 15-yard load or something.
I was doing the same thing, Scott.
So just it makes it easier for me to think about it. So 300 being 20 dump trucks, but any other, Dan, did you have any comments on it? Have you had a chance to look at it?
Yeah, I did. I went through it briefly. I do certainly want to spend a little bit more time looking at it. I also, the 1,000 yards, I kind of agree with Larry. Seems like a pretty large jump. I would be interested to know, like, you had indicated that a couple of these come up a year. Maybe the last or something like that. Some of the larger ones I can think of, the Highlands projects, obviously those are bigger scale outside the quarry. But I'd be interested, do we have, anything outside of, the quarry operation or the Highlands type projects? Most of those permits in that 300 to 500 range or less. So potentially could that 1,000 be lowered a little bit, to 500 or 600 or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I can certainly look at, the blasting permits we've issued in the last 5 years and kind of see what their volumes were and that kind of stuff and figure out, if they're all
not a whole lot.
500 or less, maybe that threshold needs to be 500.
But I agree. If for, like a house project, the ones that were just done on Middlesex Road, I certainly think the code enforcement officer ought to have some latitude to handle some of those smaller type applications. But I also want to be mindful that, 1,000 yards of ledge excavation is it's a pretty big project. If it could be a water main or a sewer project, for instance, that could, be several thousand feet of a project that could potentially impact, several buildings and that sort of thing over a linear type project. So
If I recall, the Mountain Road blasting permit we issued maybe a year ago was 700 yards, and that was a linear, it was a sewer pipe, as a part of Mountain Road.
And in that regard too, that blasting permit was not anticipated when they stepped through the planning board process, so they had to come back for that permit. But that's kind of, that one may be a mea culpa for the engineer that designed it in the first place. But typically those are in tandem when we get a big site plan coming in or a large subdivision and road that is blasting. They're getting their permits with you on that as well. So.
All right.
I've gotten some good feedback here. What I will do is get some clarification from Tom about that notification issue that about providing notice to him in advance of a blasting operation, as well as kind of look back on the last 5 or 6 years worth of blasting permits to see what those volumes are and if there's a clear break or something that's more sensible. And I'll bring a new draft back to you either early January or the latter half of January. So thank you.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I think the 3 is probably too low, but
Yeah. Cool.
All right, and we're going to talk about the waiver procedures tonight too.
Yeah, I'll pass
Sure.
pass that over to Rod.
Do you want to share screen or? Yeah, I can share screen too, actually. Why don't I do that? I'll share the screen and step through it. Really, I'm going to assume, raise your hand if you've read the memo. So I'll just kind of answer questions at this point. I mean, you kind of understand what we try to do when we're either amending something or developing something new. What's the purpose? Why is this coming up? This one was actually brought up by the board for us to kind of review this and come to you with some sort of resolution to the waiver procedures that we have. So, identifying where they exist, what they say. I guess my angle on this was to just perhaps do some house cleaning with this and chat about the language within the waiver procedures and the idea of consolidating them by reference into one spot so that the waivers that are issued by the planning board go through the same exact procedure and it isn't confusing to either the applicant or you folks as to what section, different standards or what have you. So I guess I'll field any questions that you have.
I mean, it looks good as far as trying to get it focused in one place and a line in it. The hard thing I have is wondering, in where we put it. I mean, in the 225, the waiver only pertains to parking, right?
Yeah, I mean, here's the weird thing with our ordinance. In our land use code, we have a bunch of added performance standards as they relate to certain zones or certain uses, which is a bit on top of having site plan and other non-unified standards. So one of the thoughts is to embed it to relate to performance standards within 225, which by reference, you folks review those standards as well and issuing permits. So for instance, if you're reviewing a planned commercial development and or a planned residential development, those standards are in the 225 section. And you're issuing permits based on, the project needs to meet those standards. So adding this and then referencing it in the non-unified, the chapter 175, 191, 185. If it's embedded in 225, then it would serve where you want to identify what waivers make sense for 225. Right now, the waiver procedure pertains to parking in 225.
Right.
Some of the internal discussion with the code officer and planning staff is, there's some performance standards that, with whatever the intent, however good the intent is, taking into the context of every single parcel in town, for instance, landscaping standards and site plan are waivable, they're not in 225. But again, we wouldn't make somebody blast ledge to put in a canopy tree. I guess in short, what I'm saying is some waivers make complete sense and are easy to make findings of fact. Some are not, some are more complex, but that flexibility given to the planning board in their review and I always call it, the 7 adults having a discussion and making a decision. I really do trust and rely that wherever you guys end up is the appropriate place to issue these permits. So I was not making any sense, that probably, but I guess, in short, I'm comfortable embedding this in 225 as it relates to performance standards, not dimensional we can't issue variances.
Right.
We can issue waivers based on performance standards that may not be applicable to certain contexts. That was what I was trying to say in short. And then it would also make sense from a formatting issue to have it embedded there.
Mm-hmm. And really the devil is in the details as far as what performance standards it would apply to in 225 that are felt that are waivable,
it gives
potentially.
the planning board a lot of power, in all honesty. There's been many memos written from the planning office, even just for site plan, not recommending to grant a waiver, and the waivers were granted, albeit that was years ago now. But, from what I've seen on recent planning boards, the discussions have been to the level that make me comfortable that they've ended in a good place, in a very reasonable. Again, and I think I created a link, or did I send the application form? Did you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah, you put a link in, Rod.
Yeah. So that, that too, I guess 2 cents and maybe how we get to that in the code, but the applicant really has to do a pretty good job of requesting a waiver. There isn't, just because I want a waiver. It's has to be far more thought out.
Mm-hmm. I think in a lot of instances where we have given waivers, specifically like the parking waivers, a lot of times it's made the project better, both for the town and the developer, as far as, no, you don't need those 40 spaces. You can, grass over 20 of them for potential need down the line if you need it. But it, gets away from that, big, huge parking lot when it's not needed by anyone. But it would be interesting to see where it goes, as far as trying to get those details worked out and where we're comfortable with having them. For
clear criteria,
but also for, future planning boards too.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'll welcome, one of the things to do, I looked at local examples. I didn't really put a huge search out there. I think we've kind of gone through this before too. the language we have is not bad, really, in
Right.
relation to what I've seen in other places. It's, you know, the justification of the waiver is, the finding should be pretty clear as to why the board feels comfortable granting this waiver.
Mhm.
But that would be something to look at as board members, you know, waiver criteria from performance standards. I mean,
Rod,
I
is
mean,
is
it's
the
too bad we
waiver
don't have,
criteria, I'm
oh.
sorry,
No, go Dan.
is the waiver criteria pretty explicit in the code currently, or is it kind of left up to interpretation and judgment?
Well, in some cases, like in the site plan, I think there's a lot of left up to judgment. It's very broad. It basically allows the board to grant a waiver considering public health, safety, and welfare without many other factors to consider. That's I think chapter 185, which is the road standards. So road construction standards, there's a waiver procedure for that. And as well as 225.27, where the parking waiver procedure, those are similar in wording, and they're a little more bulky with how the board can grant a waiver. Let me go there. Do we want to look at those at all?
Sure.
Or did I put it in that memo? I think I may have.
Yeah, I think you provided a bunch of links. Yeah, the waiver procedures and, yeah.
So let me go to, I'll
The
just go to
current
the street
language
design.
you included in there mostly. And just you were adding purpose
Right.
in your memo. And then that language is the language from 185.
Yes, so let me share that real quick. So this is what it looks like in the E-code here. It's very, you know, it's procedure heavy, not criteria heavy. Again, when you get into this, it's always, in I guess my opinion, it's going to be context based. We're not going to understand, you know, the parcel, the engineer that's bringing this, or surveyor, what have you, seeking a waiver will identify something contextually on the parcel that perhaps meets these criteria and that the board would discuss and come to a conclusion on. So it's hard to write criteria explicitly without having an understanding of the situation for the request, really. I mean, in this way, let's see.
I mean, that is the function of the planning board, is to exercise its best judgment with regard to the parcel and the request being made for the waiver. So I think by the nature of the beast, you are really stuck with some fairly subjective, objective standards.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Larry. The other thing to, you know, in the looking at section C1 here, so the specific section, so they need to identify exactly the section of the code that they need the waiver from, the proposed alternative to the requirement. I don't think we've seen that come in, but that's an interesting way to say, okay, if you need to plant 3 canopy trees along your frontage, but you can only do 2, what's an alternative that can be done that the board feels comfortable granting the waiver? And then justifications for an approval of the waiver. You know, there's other things that projects that may not need a high intensity soil survey for the scale of the project, but we require it anyway. Or, there's other items that are fairly minimal. And then there's big ones that, although I can't think of them off the top of my head, but and that's something that the board will discuss. The wholesale waiver of a particular section of code would be very difficult, I would imagine, versus, some minor element.
Yeah, my recollection, it's usually some minor element so far, and I haven't seen a big one.
Yeah,
too bad, we don't have Josh or Bruce on the.
Josh was the one that wanted to chat about this.
Yeah, both of the lawyers had,
Yeah.
questions about the waivers, and where they could apply and where they can't apply. I know Bruce often brings it up when we're talking about them too. So I'm sure wherever we go with it tonight, there'll be additional input from them on it also.
Well, at the end of the day, at the very least, making sure the language is similar across the board, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And not having different waiver language in different sections. If we need to keep them in different sections, that may be okay, as long as the language is the same.
It certainly seems like the language in site plan is kind of just wide open, not as prescriptive as these, in 185 and 225. And the fact that we can waive anything in site plan.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, the one that the dead end road section in subdivision is the one place that waivers don't apply to that section. It explicitly states that. Or actually it provides its own, well, actually there is kind of a waiver procedure there. It's almost a dichotomous key of, if you're planning a dead end, it needs to meet all of these standards kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not go there tonight, though.
No. No.
I think at the end of your memo, Rod, the saying number 2, consideration of environmental impacts. I think that's actually a good suggestion to have in there with the public health, safety, and welfare. To maybe have that as also a part of what we consider.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, Rod. I think that makes sense, and I'm assuming all 4 of those bullet items are not explicitly covered by the code waiver language at this point in time, including waivers are only granted by a majority vote of the board.
Right, those are not in the yeah, correct. Those would be added if you.
I mean, I would think all 4 of those, I mean, they seem like they would be completely appropriate to consider. As far as this language development.
But we really don't do anything without a majority vote of the board. I mean,
right.
It's good to add it in there.
Maybe
we've always voted on them.
Right. Maybe it's
implicit. Supermajority.
Supermajority. Okay.
Yeah, that may actually, and that's actually funny that we say that now, because that was language in another waiver procedure I saw. But you're right, it has to be a majority vote anyway to grant a waiver.
Yeah, and they're always during a public hearing too, aren't they?
Well, that's just by practice. That's not embedded in our code, though. I mean, you guys could actually grant waivers without having a public hearing.
Oh, we could put ourselves out of business. We waive everything.
Well, certainly if you have a controversial type of waiver request, certainly, you certainly wouldn't want to do that without a public hearing. So it certainly would make sense to have that step embedded in code from my perspective. It sounds like most of these instances are fairly minor in nature anyways, and it could probably dovetail with the regular public hearing for the overall project.
All right.
So I'll kind of come back with the next memo you'll see will just be language and trying to rectify where this can be placed. But I'll kind of go with that. So far, the framework of the Chapter 185 waiver procedures, and look to enhance on some of those bullet items. But you know, the other thought I had is trying to think about findings, criteria for findings that the board could positively make. So I'll try to think of something there.
Sounds good.
We saw, Andrew said you sent out a brief thing on the revisions to the use table, you're going to those categories, et cetera. Is that still moving forward? That's something we'll see in January, or?
Total, we're looking at 4 or 5 amendments for this cycle. So we brought 2 to you tonight and bring another 2 to you in January. The use table is a bigger lift in a lot of different ways. So I'm actually going to bring to you.
Andrew,
Andrew.
folks hear that there's something going on with your microphone, Andrew. I don't know if anybody else has noticed.
Oh yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
No, you're still on.
You sound like Darth Vader, Andrew.
I am not your father.
How about that?
Sounds good.
Yeah, he is working. It's just to translate what Andrew said. He is working on it. It's a bulkier item that's being that will be brought to you in a better format. So you'll see it next time.
Great. And I didn't bring it up when we were talking to CPEC, but is that anything that's kind of dovetailing in some of the stuff they're looking at for the use downtown?
No, it eventually it would, but you guys are jumping the gun on it, I think.
Okay.
The other piece was conditional use stuff as well.
Yeah.
That's all part of the discussion. It's a big item. And if you folks feel comfortable moving it forward, then it will move forward, and we'll do the work for that. But we are, we're anticipating what future zoning will lead to and how a new use table could be thought about.
Right. And
to be honest, there's no real changes to the current use table.
Right. But if we're moving towards those categories, does that make it an easier jump if we end up going to the form-based zoning, to have that groundwork laid ahead of time? I don't know. Seems like it might.
That's that. Yeah, pretty much.
All right. I guess that's it. Happy holidays, you guys.
Yeah,
Thank you. You too.
We'll see you in 2021.
You too.
Put 2020 behind us.